You now say soon on day 326?
What is this? You're like counting the days now, like you're some kind of prisoner?
When?
Are you going to stop copyright striking my videos, Netflix? Every Stranger Things video, it gets blocked, I appeal it, you issue a copyright strike and a takedown order that takes ages to dispute. And no matter what editing I try, very fast cuts, flipping images, the classic pink clouds moving in the background, it still gets striked. So in order to try and get my next videos released in the run up to season 5, I am afraid you're now just going to get screenshots for most of this. Yep, I think Stranger Things season 2 is misunderstood. Like, don't get me wrong, it has problems. We are going to discuss the problems. I did in fact already discuss some of the problems in my last video analysing the first episode of season 2. But the thing is, despite obvious flaws to the season, I still really love it. I think it's massively underrated and it gets to do something specific that no other season of Stranger Things tackles in quite the same way or quite as successfully. And that's precisely because of how weird it is. Not weird in the season 3 off-the-wall cartoonish sense, but in the narrative structure of this season. It's very odd, and the bizarre way everything's structured I think is the cause both for this season's greatest strengths, but also its flaws, and we are going to discuss it all today. Does that sound good to you? Yeah? Well then, check out this cool train. Let's start with the weaknesses, because I don't think people often drill down into the root problems of those weaknesses. And let's start with Max and Billy. Most people seem to find their introductions lackluster. We only see Max through the eyes of the other kids. She's kept at a distance while they ogle and gasp in awe at a girl who likes the arcade, oh my god. They stalk her until they confirm she's Mad Max, the person with a high score on Dig Dug, and then they go home. None of that tells us why she's important, why we should care, right? All we get of Billy in episode 1 is basically him dramatically stepping out of the car and walking off while these random students stare at him. That may be enough to intrigue them, but not me. None of this tells us how he's going to matter to the story. And to be honest, I don't think Billy ever does really matter. If you cut him out of the story this season, everything functions just the same. He hates Lucas. Racism is an interesting theme we could be exploring a lot more here, but I can't say that he ever really impacts Lucas beyond one scene near the end when he goes to attack him before Steve intervenes and then Max does. And it's not like this changes Lucas in any way or his feelings are ever explored here. He almost gets attacked, it's prevented, then we move on. You know, I mean, it's great for Max to step in and force Billy to agree to leave them alone, but that kind of makes Billy's impact even more nullified. He's teased all season like he's going to be a big threat and antagonist, and then when he finally gets the chance to do something, he hurts Steve, sure, but otherwise he's just stopped and then leaves, and then the only character he matters to is still Max, rather than both of them mattering to the rest of the story at large. Max stops him, and then they all go on their merry way to where the real antagonist is. So he feels more like a detour than an interesting obstacle in himself, which is a shame because there is so much depth to be explored here. Some really interesting and moving scenes. I love this heartbreaking scene here. And then he's great in season 3. I really like what they do with him there, but he doesn't have much clear function right now. Okay, he's set up as something of a rival to Steve. Billy is now the one winning at basketball and chugging beer. But does anyone really care? Steve seems slightly miffed, but not particularly because he's moved on as a person. Steve in season 1 would have cared that his king identity was under threat by Billy, but season 2 Steve is more mature. So most of that makes Billy feel like an annoying wasp buzzing in his ear than a real substantial rival that has personal feeling in Steve's arc, you know? Even when they have their fights, it's a big deal for Billy, but Steve lacks much personal feeling about this. He just wants Billy to leave them alone. I think Max, by contrast, does somewhat matter, but again, mostly that's in how she relates to others rather than mattering in her own right. It's not until episode 6 where Max's feelings are explored, and whilst that does add weight to all of her earlier moments in retrospect, it's a shame we have to wait that long. Prior to that, she does feel deliberately at a distance to us. I think the idea, of course, being that it takes her time to let her walls come down, but that also denies us a chance to be invested in her early on. So as a result, she only really matters because she's providing space for Dustin and Lucas to be in a conflict over her, both of them wanting to date her without it being particularly clear if she even knows this for most of it, and she allows space for Mike to be in conflict with the rest of the party because them being interested in Max feels like they're replacing Elle, and then eventually when Elle returns, she doesn't like Max because she thinks she's a rival for Mike. You know, her purpose is mostly being a passive figure caught in the middle of what other people think. I'd like Max to have been a bit more involved, to get some agency or some voice to respond to all of these different ways people seem to feel about her, or just have some other space of her own to impact the story for who she is as a person. I don't think that she can drive a car is good enough. In season 3 she has impact. She's helping Elle find herself. She's an opposite voice to Mike on most of the party issues because she's seeing Elle as someone strong to support, where he sees her as someone vulnerable to protect. And then there's obviously some really great exploration between her and Billy in that season, which culminates in his death. That's great. Max and Billy are both interesting in season 2. Both have deep and moving scenes that are well written, but neither feel integral to the story. And we could kind of say the same of Jonathan. Besides a great scene in episode 1, he basically just follows Nancy. You know, I think them going to Murray and having to water down the truth for the papers is a really clever plot line, but all of that could happen without Jonathan. You wouldn't notice much difference. It's Elle that's the real heart of this season though, and she's where all of this becomes the most complex. So let's talk about 11 for a moment.
When you turned 8, I gave you that huge
subscription to AckyFlow.
Do you remember that? All you wanted to do was
boost your productivity. Yep, this video is sponsored by AckyFlow. AckyFlow is the productivity tool for busy professionals, for people who benefit from structure, and for people attempting to make 2 videos per season of Stranger Things before the new season drops. What can I say? AckyFlow helps. AckyFlow is a tool designed for time blocking that I think stands out for its intuitive interface, color coding available, and a lot of useful flexibility. I've got my days, I've got different tasks I can assign for certain times or even group within bigger projects. You can set reminders for each task on your PC or your phone, but best of all, you can integrate all these other apps. Like, say you're used to using Google Calendar, that's fine, just sync it with AckyFlow. If you want to integrate your emails, even from multiple different addresses, simple. If you get sent a particularly tricky email that you need a long time to answer, just right click, label it for AckyFlow, and then now it's here in your task manager. Perfect. It's just nice to have everything unified in a single place rather than endlessly having to check different apps and accounts and all sorts all of the time. But look, maybe there's more you'd like to know. Maybe their AI assistant interests you, or you have a load of questions about how best to tailor AckyFlow to your needs. So why not schedule a free one-to-one call with one of their agents? Talk to them about what your needs are, what you'd like to learn. Choose a date, choose a time, sorted. That is available to you now if you click the link in the description or the pin's comments. Give it a look. AckyFlow. At the end of episode 1, we see 11 is living in secret with Hopper. In episode 2, we get flashbacks to show the meeting. He offered her a semblance of family, which is something she's been needing, but then Hopper isn't the best. He's overprotective and a bit neglectful, and when he breaks his promise to her, she shuts herself in her room and spies on Mike. And this is kind of the arc being established. Hopper isn't giving me the sense of belonging I need, mainly due to his own fears and how the loss of his daughter informs that, but if he's not giving me what I need, I will turn to Mike. I'll try and find him again. That's good because we empathise with exactly why she wants to do that, but we also know it's going to be dangerous, so there's tension there. Will it work out? In episode 3, we get more flashbacks before she then does now go out looking for Mike. But when she gets there, she sees Max talking to him, thinks she's being replaced, so in episode 4 we see her go home again. I mean, there haven't been any real dangerous consequences to the fact she went out. No one saw her at school. One woman in the park did report her to the police, but Hopper shut that down. It makes Hopper angry with her, and angry enough that Eleven will then have real motivation to leave home later on. It is an interesting conflict, but there's nothing greater here either. This is just more of the conflict we were already having that enables her to do the things she was already half doing. And it feels like we're going in a circle. She felt stuck and alone, so dared to go after Mike, only now she feels stuck and alone again. Which I suppose itself is an interesting feeling, the kind of going in circles and the worry she's being forgotten, although that is somewhat contradicted by the fact Mike has been calling her every night for the past year. Clearly he hasn't forgotten, but still, I don't hate the idea, just the pace of it. 4 episodes in, and one of, if not the main characters, hasn't really gotten anywhere. This is a long time to be going round in circles, and the lack of progression is a huge part, I think, of why so many people find this season really slow. Halfway through episode 4, she finds a file about her mum, and now she's finally got some drive. She can go and find her mum. She will provide a sense of belonging and some important answers and identity. Episode 5, yes, she goes out, she meets her mum, and we get a beautiful scene I could talk about extensively. There's so many great benefits to it that I don't want to just be dismissing, but again, Elle isn't given what she wanted. Not somewhere safe to belong. Her mum tells her to go and find Carly instead, and that she'll provide the belonging. She'll be like a big sister. But it's starting to feel a bit like a wild goose chase, you know? Going from Hopper to Mike to Terry to Carly. And I think because we've bounced around for so long, the impact of meeting Carly feels drastically reduced. I think they should have been building to their meeting from the very beginning as the big sense of belonging, or at least the hope that that's what it'll be. Carly is the place to go. Obviously, Elle wouldn't know that at the time, but it could be being established for us in the build-up, giving us some anticipation, fostering the feeling of, ooh, meeting Carly is going to be big for her. And I think you do that by basically just having a couple more tiny scenes of Carly spread somewhere across like episodes 2 or 3 or 4. Something that shows us, whilst she likes the friends she's with, none of them quite understand her. That she feels like she's missing a kindred spirit, you know? That whilst she might not be looking for 11, maybe she does think of the other kids from Hawkins' lab, sometimes wonders about them. Something to hint that it will mean a lot personally for each of them when they meet. Building up their union as we get closer towards it, rather than it kind of feeling tacked on. Or alternatively, you just get rid of Carly completely. I think there is some value to her scenes that we will discuss in a moment, but the other knock-on effect of leaving Terry to visit Carly is that it reduces the weight of Eleven's mum and aunt. And that was the one they did tease this season. We had a flashback scene of Eleven asking Hopper about her mum and Hopper lying that she was dead. Eleven clearly having a lot of feelings here, and this mum in the park who spots Eleven on the way to Mike. Eleven is clearly feeling a yearning to have a mother figure in her life. Plus, again, she had a big row with Hopper and feels hurt by his lack of parenting. That's all good build up to getting to visit Eleven's mum, and it feels like that then should be the focus. It feels like visiting Terry should be the end point of this journey she's gone on, where she'll then be faced with the dilemma to either stay here or go back to Hawkins. But instead, no, she's very quickly bounced on again to this other girl where no real weight had been built up between them, and that's going to be the end point of the journey. So I think you kind of damage both of these moments by not focusing properly on either. Now, admittedly, this whole plotline is strange. To introduce another girl like 11 and then we have her completely disappear again. That is strange, but I don't like people writing it off as completely pointless. It has value, and let me express that by first just summarising this season altogether. Mike feels like he's supposed to settle down and forget the madness of last year, but he can't just pretend it didn't happen, and he can't forget Elle. Nancy is legally ordered to stay silent, but neither she nor Jonathan can. They want to fight back. Will just wants to live, but he can't. They have to fight back against the Mind Flayer Flayer in order for him to earn his chance to live. Joyce wants to nurture and care for her son, but realizes the way to help him is to fight back against the spirit possessing him. Elle just wants to live, but she can't either, because she's got to stay hidden. Only hiding in the cabin doesn't help, and she can't go to Mike, and she can't stay with Terry. Therefore, Carly helps 11 find the motivation not to be hiding, but to really fight back. Not to be just waiting and hoping to be permitted a normal life. Carly is going about killing the people who previously prevented her from doing that. If 11 wants to live, she has to fight for it. Carly teaches that. And similarly, she helps 11 learn to channel her anger to increase her power, which I think is a natural beat you should be getting somewhere in Elle's story. I like that it's here. And yeah, plus obviously this is meant to feel like a home for 11, somewhere she can belong, a group of outlaws and misfits. It makes a lot of sense as a deliberate contrast to what Hopper was offering. It also lines up perfectly with Jonathan's talk to Will about embracing being a freak. And also, I think someone who grew up with this idiot as a father figure would be rebelling and pushing the boundaries in adolescence with Hopper to the extent of running away and joining some punk heist crew. not to reduce her actions down to a simple rebellion, obviously it's way more than that, but it's still fitting. Crucially, whilst Carly is right about fighting back, what is she actually fighting for? Vengeance, basically. Killing the people who previously made her life horrible. Is that a worthy reason to kill? For Elle, no. She wants to fight, but in order to live, in order to be safe, to protect the ones she cares about. That's contrast between her and Carly, channeling anger for vengeance and channeling anger to protect the ones you love. I really like that as an idea. Carly teaches us both the importance of anger, but also the negative example of what Elle might become if she loses herself to the anger. And, you know, anger channeled to protect those you love is also exactly Joyce's triumph this season. Pouring so much rage against the Mind Flayer is exactly what enables her to save Will, like a fierce mother protecting her cubs. As soon as Elle discovers Mike and Hopper and all of them are in danger, she is gone. She ditches Carly. That is a better cause than vengeance, which Carly is actually putting them all in more danger by doing. So yeah, I think all of this stuff is meaningful. I think it does have a lot of value, it just doesn't feel impactful. And for me, the reasons why are firstly because she doesn't feel to us like she belongs there. For this to work, we have to first believe she is actually starting to fit in here, right? We have to see this working, but we don't have enough time for that feeling to properly be conveyed. We always knew Elle was going to break away because Carly was never established fully enough as a character. And consequently, the choice to go home is too easy. There's nothing she's losing as a result. Take this same exact beat from season 4. Elle goes away to discover some hidden inner strength, but before she can finish her training, she discovers her friends at home are in danger. She has to make a choice to go back now and potentially be weaker for that fight, or stay and get better but risk seeing them die while she's doing that. That's a good dilemma. The classic Empire Strikes Back one. Elle makes the choice to go back early, but it does cost her. She is almost beaten by Henry. She fails to fully protect Max, and Hawkins is literally torn apart. All good consequences to a difficult dilemma. But season 2 here is not a dilemma. It's go with Carly to kill people that she doesn't want to kill, or go home and save people she cares about. You know, that's, in my opinion, what makes this feel like a pointless detour. Even though there technically is some meaning to it, it's the fact that Elle isn't really losing anything in a decision to leave them. And also, we never actually see what happens to Carly. That's also a problem. Yeah, for Elle to have all of these structural flaws in her arc across this season, I think definitely weakens the season massively as a whole. But that isn't my conclusion. Firstly, I think Noah Schnapp puts in a hell of a performance as Will here. This season is the most interesting Will has ever been by a long shot, and he's absolutely killing it. Will's story is literally about coming out of everything that happened last season and just wanting to be a kid, but everyone is anxious around him, like something terrible will happen. And everyone else calls him Zombie Boy, and he has to see a psychiatrist, I guess. I don't know what kind of Dr. Owens actually is. He's probably not a psychiatrist, is he? But you just feel the pain here, the helplessness, anxiety within his own skin, awareness of this other presence. Will feels violated, and I'm glad the Duffer Brothers didn't skip over this. I think it's dark and really meaningful and can relate to a lot of different things. A lot of shows would have avoided exploring the murkiness here because it's not convenient for a fast-paced story. I think most of what they're trying to explore in this season is not convenient for a fast-paced story. I think you would have to execute everything so perfectly for it not to feel like it drags at least a little bit in places, but that doesn't mean the ideas here aren't worth exploring. If Elle's arc feels like it's going in circles for a long time, that's also literally the point, I think. If Billy's rivalry with Steve feels pathetic and immature, that's also the point. If Dustin and Lucas obsessing over Max feels banal, like, of course it does. These things are ordinary life. These are things that for ordinary kids should be the biggest issues going on for them, the stuff they are absorbed by. However, there's this dark shadow of everything else they've been through. A shadow in the back of their minds that just sucks the colour from all of ordinary banal living and reminds you how tragic their experiences are. Everything was supposed to be over, and yet nobody feels like anything is over. They all feel stuck, lying dormant, pretending everything is fine when it's obviously not, and I'm a sucker for that kind of story. I've got a real thing for second seasons of shows that try to do this kind of thing. Broadchurch Season 2 is another obvious example that springs to mind. You know, taking all of the struggle of Season 1 and rather than just neatly concluding it so you can move on to something new, dragging it out into something that is always going to be more messy and slow and kind of frustrating, but that's also what's so captivating about it, you know, that's the emotion. The lasting effects of trauma are rarely cinematic, but who cares? Everyone was supposed to come out of Season 1 like this unified team, but then going into this season, they aren't that. Characters are more isolated now than ever. Elle has no idea Hopper is trapped underground, and he has no idea she's run away. Nobody knows where Jonathan and Nancy are, and Joyce doesn't even want Will's friends to see him half the time. People often do bond through trauma, but it's also not often as straightforward as that. The characters here were unified by the threat of the Upside Down, and now that they think it's gone, they start to fragment and find their own ways to process or cope with what happens to them. And when those ways of processing or coping differ to each other, that creates friction between them. Arguably, a lot of them are projecting their own trauma onto Will as the person to be worried about, rather than themselves. All of this makes everyone drift apart, perhaps seen most obviously between Nancy and Jonathan and Steve. Like, their whole vague love triangle between them this season isn't the most electrifying, but the shades of processing trauma beneath it are a nice touch. Nancy calls Steve bullshit because her method of coping is different to his, basically. That's very raw. I love it. So, is it a slow season? Yes, and not everybody enjoys a slow burn. Do all plot threads work perfectly and reach satisfying conclusions? No. Do people hate it when I ask and answer my own questions? Most definitely. However, the season still feels like it's trying to dig deep into the trenches of every character's feelings. They still feel very real and heartfelt here. And as a result, you get so many beautiful or heart-wrenching moments. Hopper shouting at Elle to grow the hell up, the long scene they have in the car together near the end, Mike raging at Hopper for keeping Elle a secret, Will finally opening up to his mum about the shadow monster, all of them trying to reach Will while he's possessed. Oh my god, you know, I think these are up with the best scenes from all of the series. I hugely respect a story that's not afraid to be messy. I would rather something messy that seeks to explore character depth than something very tight and fast-flowing that has to dilute its characters from earlier seasons in order to accommodate new plot threads. Can we talk about Bob as well? Bob is a wonderful character because his whole deal is that he's just a good, ordinary, wholesome guy. Symbolically, he is Joyce's and the Byer family's chance at normality. They try very hard to be a normal family this season, but it obviously doesn't work. They also try very hard to hide all the chaos of being a supernatural adventure family from Bob, because I think there's that worry that trauma infects, like it's a curse that will spread. That's if we bring other people into the parts of our world that feel broken to us, it will break them too. The visuals this season are all about infected roots branching out. And I know what you're all going to say, but no, it doesn't break Bob. He gets brought into their world and he absolutely thrives. He finds Hopper, saves his life, learns about Will and the Upside Down, never once freaking out or being tempted to ditch them, by the way. He throws himself in with full commitment because maybe we don't break the people we let into our worlds. Maybe we just discover a side of them we didn't know was there. By the way, I really love the addition of this moment where he's hiding in a cupboard from a demodog. He holds his breath in fear, it goes past, it's a relief that it's gone. Normally in films, characters just sigh, get out and then carry on, but Bob has to be talked to come out of this cupboard again. I really like that they include that.
You got a pretty clear shot to the front door.
Okay.
Now you can do this, okay?
You're almost home free, all right, Bob?
I wish you saw that kind of thing so much more. But yeah, the fact he thrives is what makes his death so tragic. Not because it was doomed to happen. It's the reverse. That's the whole twist. Like, in episode 1, I was thinking Bob is going to be killed off and replaced so that Joyce can get with Hopper. I was thinking, obviously, Bob doesn't fit. Joyce seems a little hesitant with him at times, and the kids laugh at him for liking Kenny Rogers, find his favourite movies boring, the advice he gives Will doesn't suit. You're led to believe Bob is incompatible with the Byers family, but then he absolutely is compatible. And just as we're starting to discover how well they all fit as a family unit, that's when he dies. Perfect tragedy, give you the hope of something triumphant only to snatch it away, whilst also expressing an important theme. Trauma doesn't have to infect and spread. Joyce, Will, Jonathan may not be normal people, normal in quotation marks by the way, but they can still thrive within the normal world. We can still reconnect to the community because those people can still connect to us. Little by little, if it's safe, we can let them in and recognise that the giant chasm of our past experiences doesn't have to isolate us. Which is perhaps what's so moving about the scene where they all reach into Will's heart. It is misfortune Bob happens to die at the end, but he wasn't doomed to die. That wasn't doomed to happen, and it doesn't negate the message here. The season ends with Elle sealing up the wound, no longer hiding away from the pain, but finally resolving it for herself. And then they all go off to the snowball to finally just be kids. And maybe you find that end scene cheesy, but I'm glad it's there. It's the light at the end of this murky tunnel and feels like a perfect conclusion to the story. In the poll I put out about whether Stranger Things should have ended after season 1, the most votes went to saying yes, it should have ended. But I think season 2 is a much more complete ending than season 1, thematically speaking. I'm very glad we got this season, and I will let you know what I think about Season 3 and Season 4 another time. I think my thoughts might actually surprise a lot of you there, so I hope you stay tuned for that. For now, let me know what you think. Comment your thoughts, good or bad, subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee or become a channel member. But otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Luke Hoare, Michael Gallagher, Ben Marie, Thafy, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.